I would like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to take part in this extraordinary event. By holding these sessions, you gave me, and many others, an opportunity to delve into Rabbi Zach's writing and ponder his legacy. I will begin with one personal note. Preparation for this lecture for me was a new type of challenge. It required a shift in perspective from reading Rabbi Zach as a student during my free time or between aliyot during Parsha reading, to using my judgment as a scholar. Rabbi Zach's writings are relevant and significant to me, like many others, on a personal level. Preparing a lecture using academic standards was therefore difficult. This presentation, therefore, also includes my own personal dialogue with the sermons and other writings. The questions I chose to address in this talk reflect those I would have liked to discuss with Rabbi Zach. As I delved into his words anew, I found I had some ambivalence regarding the way he framed exile and correspondingly his remarks regarding the state of Israel. In this lecture, I will try to look at the larger picture. In doing so, I'm following Rabbi Zach. In the introduction to Covenant Conversation, he wrote, "Much Torah study today, beautiful though it is conducted by microscope rather than telescope. It focuses on individual brush strokes, not the larger picture." Rabbi Zach's approach to exile and its possible end with the establishment of the State of Israel is a large topic, but I will illustrate my perspective using examples. Rabbi Zach's thought revolved around Bible, more so than rabbinic literature. Writing as he did for a broad audience that at times also included Christians, the sermons I examined revolved around Torah portions and biblical literature. As I delved into Rabbi Zach's words, I wondered, how did he perceive life in exile? How did he relate to the state of Israel? In what ways was Rabbi Zach a Zionist? I began my study by looking closely at terminology Rabbi Zach employed on the subject. While this research is preliminary, my initial search of relevant terminology in Rabbi Zach's sermons yielded few appearances of the word exile, in some it appears alongside with the word galut, and more appearances of diaspora. The word community was far more common. Much of his thought on Jewish identity, it is clear, revolves around community, and especially communities in diaspora. In an early quote from Rabbi Zach, which appears in the third of 5 pamphlets written in 1993, under the title Studies in Renewal, he states, "If anything is responsible for the unparalleled strength of Jewish identity during the long centuries in which they were scattered throughout the world, a minority everywhere, it is this, the concept to which Jews and Judaism gave the name galut, exile. They neither converted to the dominant faith nor assimilated to the prevailing culture. The sole reason was that they never mistook a particular place for home, temporary location, for ultimate destination. Outside Israel, Jewish life is a way, a path, a route, even an encampment, a place of rest. It is still called a journey." This aligns quite closely with my own understanding of the state of Israel and Zionism, which interacts in many ways with Rav Kook's view, as well as those of my great-grandfather, Dr. Isaac Royer. Both thinkers thought they held vastly different approaches, held nationalistic views. Both expressed an expectation that the state of Israel would constitute to the end to the Jewish exilic state. To my mind, the state of Israel has always been the resolution to the dispersion and exile. With its establishment, the seeds of the redemption are apparent. Zionism means that Israel is the one true home of the Jewish people, the center of all Jewish activity. The establishment of the state, for me, constitutes a crucial turning point for Jews around the world. It is easy to see a connection to the state of Israel and Zionism in Rabbi Zach's sermons. He was a lover of Israel. He visited often. He had family here. And it was clearly a place to which he attributed great significance. He was a staunch defender of the country and a builder of bridges between cultures. Nonetheless, I found that it was difficult to find texts similar to the one we just read, which express a similar view regarding the temporary nature of exile. Rabbi Zach's definition of Jewish identity rarely related directly on the state of Israel. We begin with looking at the texts that relate to Jewish identity, exile, and diaspora. When describing the longest exile ever endured by people, Sachs described the 1800 years before the rise of the state of Israel. The basis of his understanding of exile is clearly stated in the ceremony to the Book of Numbers. The fact that in Judaism the Torah was given by Midbar in the desert before they had even entered the land meant that uniquely Jews in Judaism were able to survive, their identity intact, even in exile, because the law came before the land. Even when Jews lost the land, they still had the law. Even in exile, Jews were still a nation. Rabbi Sachs's understanding of Jewish existence, it is clear, does not require contact between the Jewish nation and their land, Israel. In fact, in his thought, the Israelites became a nation in the wilderness, and that is essential to their identity. He says something similar when discussing the role of the Sukkah. The Sukkah became in the course of the time a symbol, not only 40 years in the wilderness, but centuries of exile and dispersion. Too often, home turned out to be no more than a temporary dwelling, a Sukkah. More than most, whether in the land of Israel or elsewhere, Jews have known a full force of insecurity. Rabbi Sachs sees exile as a formative and defining for the Jewish nation. But in these passages and others, the state of Israel does not enter the equation with the status and the scope that I would have expected. Rabbi Sachs contends our world has become a global village in which Jewish people who hold onto their Jewish identity live in communities. Comparing Jewish identity in Israel to Jewish identity in diaspora, he states, there is nothing inevitable about Jewish identity in the diaspora, and there never was. In Israel, things are different. There, one is a Jew by living in the Jewish state, surrounded by a Jewish culture and Jewish institutions. The language is Hebrew, the calendar is Jewish. Only in Israel is Jewishness a matter of what you can see and touch and breathe. In the diaspora, being Jewish has always meant going against the grain, being a counterculture. But that was where they were, not who they were. Who they were was the very opposite of the here and now. It was a breathtaking identity spanning time and space, centuries and quantities. Jews were defined by a network of relationships stretching back to the biblical past and forward to the Messianic future, linked in a common destiny with Jews across the globe. Diaspora Jewish identity was and is a matter of the mind, not the senses. And anti-Semitism, while it may remind us that we are Jews, provides no reason for us to want our children to be Jewish. Jews survived quite simply because they devoted their best energies, education, their money to schools, their admiration to scholars, their spare hours to study, and their first concern to the tuition of their children. Their identity was constantly learned and relearned, enacted and reinforced, and passed on as a precious gift to the next generation. The secret of Jewish continuity is that Jews cared about it. They created continuity by making the transmission of tradition their first duty and the greatest joy. In fact, Israel may even play a role in diaspora's interior sense of displacement. Rabbi Sachs writes, Israel had made all Jews, both in its own and those of diaspora, feel more at home in the world. At the same time, under the impact of Israel's political isolation, it has served to emphasize the non-at-homeness of the Jew. Jews, he says, will always feel displaced. They are Jews not by virtue of the fact that they confront anti-Semitism, but because wherever they are in the world, they choose to be Jewish. They choose to connect to their heritage and to transmit it to the next generation. While Rabbi Sachs relates to Israel, it is to contrast identity in Israel with the content's choice to maintain a Jewish identity in diaspora conditions. In a later text, Rabbi Sachs discusses Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. For almost 2,000 years, the Jewish people was without a home, a land, civil rights, security, and the ability to shape its destiny and fate. That is when Kiddush Hashem took on its tragic dimension, and the willingness to die for one's faith. That is no longer the case. Today, for the first time in history, Jews have both sovereignty and independence in Israel, and freedom and equality elsewhere. Kiddush Hashem must therefore be restored to its positive sense of exemplary decency in the moral life. Notice the parallel between Israel and the diaspora. The sanctification of God, according to Rabbi Sachs, is now the same everywhere in the world, including in Israel. This view of the state of Israel and diaspora as parallel entities within the Jewish nation, I will admit, challenges my own definition of Zionism and the state of Israel, where in my mind Israel has always been the center of Jewish life. For Rabbi Zach's Jewish communities around the world hold the same weight as the community in Israel. Rabbi Zach's understanding of Jewish continuity and survival in the era of diasporic Jewish communities also diverges significantly from my own. In discussing communities, he writes, the hypothesis is therefore this: that Jewish continuity in diaspora depends on Jewish education. The book of Nehemiah describes the turning point. A new era of Jewish history began. Ezra was the prototype of a teacher as a hero. By the 2nd century BCE, a system of community-funded schools developed. Universal education, the first of its kind in the world, had begun. If the Jewish people were to survive, it needed to create a set of institutions through which its character could be sustained against the tradition of cultures. It sought and found the structures of continuity. The best, indeed, the only defense of a religious people is not military or political, but educational. I must admit that this passage reads to me as almost naive. As a Zionist living in Israel, I view our defense as depending primarily on the military. Rabbi Zach's view, to my ears, echoes that of an ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, which idealizes education at the expense of national security. To me, it evokes as an exilic perspective. In fact, the subject of physical survival in Israel is marginal in Rabbi Zach's philosophy. Here, he relates to the question that, in his opinion, must be answered by the Jewish people. Survivalism emphasized the difference the state of Israel had made to the Jews worldwide, allowing them to feel more secure and more capable of taking action when particular diaspora communities are under threat of persecution. It played no small part in the worldwide Jewish response to the flight of Soviet and Ethiopian Jewry. Equally importantly, it gave Jews a way of seeing themselves as part of a single people at a time when religious and cultural differences had gone so deep that perhaps nothing else was capable of uniting them. But most could identify with the idea that, for an accident of history, they might have been the victims of Hitler's final solution. Jewish commitment to survival has not proved strong enough to ensure that Jews survive. Physical survival has dominated modern Jewish concern, and that is why Holocaust and the state of Israel have been central to our thought. The Holocaust stands as the symbol of the risk Jews face. Israel stands as a guarantor of Jewish lives and liberties worldwide. But the physical survival is not the problem confronting most diaspora Jews. It is not seriously endangered in either America or Britain. What is at risk? What is at risk is neither life nor liberty, but identity. The question is not will we survive, but how will we survive as Jews? Another challenge lies ahead. A new era has already begun. The idea that Jewish identity can be related to the state of Israel, but is not defined by it, that Jews in diaspora may choose to define themselves in ways that do not relate to Israel, appears time and again in Rabbi Zach's work. Rabbi Zach may relate to the uniqueness of life in Israel and its virtues, and we will soon see, but these do not define Jewish identity. For him, Jewish identity is defined by other virtues. For example, the role of the Jew living abroad as a model for moral human behavior. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope down here in the here and now, making life just a little better, making the world that is just a little closer to the world that it ought to be. To be a Jew for Rabbi Zach is to model hope and change. What then does Rabbi Zach say about the state of Israel? Where does it fit within his understanding of Jewish identity? Rabbi Zach relates to the challenges faced by diaspora Jews, persecution, Holocaust, and physical risk, but he never paints the state of Israel as an explicit element of the solution to these challenges. In Rabbi Sachs's work, Israel is mentioned, but not as the end to exile. The diaspora and the communities within it are still central to his thought and have a vital role to play in the world. Once again, I find myself surprised by an approach that defines Jewish continuity different from my own. Finding almost no references to the state of Israel as the end of exile in Rabbi Sachs's ceremony, I turned to his book Future Tense, which of all his books is most suitable for a discourse on the state of Israel. It defines the book as a powerful vision for the future Judaism, Jewish life, and the state of Israel in the 21st century. It was translated into Hebrew and has an introduction for the Israeli Hebrew-speaking audience, as well as Jews around the world. Here, he speaks of Jewish life in Israel. Only in Israel can Jews live Judaism in anything other than an edited edition. In Israel and only there, Jews can walk where the prophets walked, climb the mountains Abraham climbed, lift their eyes to the hills David saw, and continue the story their ancestors began. Israel is the only place in the world where Jews can create a society, and that is a religious task, even though Israel is a secular state. Judaism in Israel is a presence you bring, but not just a religion you practice. In Israel, as nowhere else, Jewishness is part of the public domain, the language, the landscape, the calendar. Rabbi Sachs clearly displays a great love for Israel and a profound sense of its meaning and importance. He describes the beauty of an authentic life in Jewish state. Yet his sermons about Israel never mention the country's political dimensions, nor do they refer explicitly to Israel as an end to exile and beginning of redemption. For Rabbi Sachs, Jewish life exists on two parallel planes, one in Israel, one in diaspora. Jewish continuity is a spiritual question, but not a physical one. Jewish identity is defined by a connection to covenant, to values, to education, but not to the state. I return here to my lecture's title. Perhaps I should have called the talk In the Shadow of the Exile and Diaspora, the State of Israel in Rabbi Sachs's Sermons. The complexity of his view of the state of Israel as the end of the exilic period made me hesitant to use such a title. As an Israeli Jew, I found that Rabbi Sachs's sermons articulated the challenges of the Jewish people well. He discusses assimilation, education, and persecution, but did not choose to relate to the state of Israel as an element in their resolution. Rabbi Sachs's approach to exile, diaspora, Israel, and Jewish communities was an after, I think, of his position and vocation. In sermons given almost exclusively in the diaspora, he spoke of universal and communal values and gave a voice to Jewish life outside of the Jewish state. But his words carry a definition of Jewish identity that challenges my own. His is a worldview that is miles apart from Rav Kook or Dr. Isaac Boyer's. As an Israeli, I was not often Rabbi Sachs's target audience, but the books that were translated into Hebrew did contain introductions for the Israeli reader. In these introductions, Rabbi Sachs expressed a desire for an encounter with Israeli society. And indeed, my encounter with his sermons has granted me an opportunity to rethink my understanding of the state of Israel's place in global Jewish identity.